One of the most impactful changes to the flea market has come unexpectedly in the newest wipe with patch 0.16. It's something BSG mentioned in passing during their October livestream, but we didn't have any context or clues as to how things were going to change. And now with the patch notes out and the wipe dropped the day after Christmas, we know what they meant. This change, alongside another one which we'll talk about in a separate video, have very long-lasting implications should these changes stand right now and stay for the duration of this and future wipe cycles. So let's talk about the single biggest change that every player of every skill level will feel and have to adjust to. Simply put, if I'm reading this change in the notes correctly, the flea market at the start of this wipe will be locked off to all players for 2 weeks following the release of patch 0.16, which means no one can use the flea market until January 9th of 2025. The exact wording of the change in the notes is, quote, listing offers on the PvP flea market will be available 2 weeks after the end of the patch 0.16 installation. Now, the only part that confuses me slightly is the latter half of that quote, after the end of patch installation. So my guess is once the patch goes live and people can start downloading it, that's when the timer starts. Even still, this is a gigantic shakeup to how we normally operate. No flea market for 2 full weeks. I had to read it multiple times to make sure I understood correctly. It's honestly something I didn't ever expect BSG to try. The entire game at this point has been built around the flea market, so we always knew it was never going to get removed. But this, well, it's kind of the next best thing. Before you freak out at the change and wonder what's going to happen, let's actually talk about this change a little bit. I can't speak for anybody but myself, but the flea market being so impactful in the early game has always soured the experience a little bit to me. Level 15 isn't too difficult to get to depending on your luck with some of the early game quests, like all the Ground Zero tasks. Play your cards right, and you can be there realistically in 2 or maybe 3 days. And then you just have full access to the market, buying and selling as you please. Before Arena was introduced, it was the most efficient way to earn money. Sell people what they need in the early game that don't require found and raid status and just watch the rubles roll in. But now, we all need to wait 2 weeks before we can even engage with this mechanic. So ultimately, what is this going to do? Extend the life of the early game. You know, the only time in the game where most, if not all, players are on an even playing field for at least a short period of time. Even with the change last wipe of not needing items to have found and raid for them to be eligible for the flea market, this is a nice counterbalance to that change. I am of the mindset that the flea market should augment our ability to trade and deal with other players, but not be the de facto way to make our money. It's always been just ludicrous how much money you can actually make through the flea. And before, it was always a mad dash to get to level 15, because at that point, Pandora's box just opens up and all the items you've been saving in your junk box, you can now just liquidate for money. But now, we'll have to wait 2 weeks before even seeing a single offer, which is going to dramatically change how people interact with the flea market and what items hold value. There's another change that is also going to impact how people use the flea, but that'll again get its own video as well, because it's just as substantial, if not more so than this one is. But in general, I like this change. The flea market has always been such a massive power spike for those that get to it first. And while BSG has been reining in what's available on the flea in different ways, whether it's banning the high penetration ammo, allowing armors but excluding the strongest plates of protection, or keeping some of the better weapons off the market, the flea has changed so many times over the years that it is simply another iteration of the same formula. And besides, it's only 2 weeks. Speaking only for myself, it usually takes me, 5 to 7 days to hit level 15. So if you think about it that way, that's really only a week without the flea. This change could have been so much worse. We kind of got off easy, but I am excited to see what happens now that no one, regardless of level, can use the flea market for 14 days. While we wait for the countdown to finish and the floodgates to open once more, the purpose of the flea market is something that we should also discuss because it's changed over the years as well. When it was first introduced, it was this kind of weird and wacky mechanic where anyone could sell anything to anyone. So naturally, within the first couple days of it existing, people broke it, which was to be expected, but over the years, BSG has been trying to find a healthy balance for what the flea market should execute on, as well as making sure it's both engaging to use, but doesn't just print money and turn the game into easy mode. We're kind of getting at the end of days for the Wild West of the flea market, and it feels like this wipe's version of it might be the best iteration so far. It's a little too early to tell because we still don't have it, but no access for 2 weeks, plus some other changes made alongside this wipe, it's going to be very interesting what the flea market looks like a month or even 2 months after it gets introduced back into this wipe. We don't know how long this cycle will be, but I'd imagine it's at least 6 months, if not more. What people want or need is going to change. While I don't expect any significant habits changing for the mid or late game of Tarkov, that's kind of set in stone, the early game, where everything is the most volatile, is absolutely going to be shaken up. Even if this is just to test some things and the market reverts back to what it was previously with the next wipe, whenever that is, it's still going to be a really interesting change to see the discourse on the market and what people think after the 2-week embargo is over and we get access to it. Again, generally I'm of the mindset that the less we need to use the flea market to function properly in the game, the better. It's cool, but the reliance on it by the community at large has only served to reduce the value of items in the game. And what I mean by that is the idea of scarcity and how we've kind of lost that somehow. Because the flea market and one good scav run can turn your financial circumstances in Tarkov completely around. We should have to feel the sting of loss more. The feeling of having almost no money on you and making really tough choices hasn't been apparent ever since the flea was added. Having the market locked off for 2 weeks brings us one step closer to that original Tarkov experience from years gone, if only temporarily, and I'm quite fine with that. This removal of everyone's access to the flea market for 2 weeks is huge. I can't emphasize that point enough. This is something we've come to rely on. Whether you're a buyer or a seller, we all use the market for one reason or another, and not allowing anyone to use it for 14 days is an interesting change that I think in the long run will serve to benefit the early game and make it feel better to jump into Tarkov even if you're a week or so late to this wipe. This is something we will most likely return to in like a month or two into this wipe because this conversation is going to be all over the place at the beginning, which totally makes sense. While my initial reaction was to kind of wince at that specific change, after thinking about it for a little while, I think it's going to be a good thing. We need a temporary stop to the flea market shenanigans, and this is exactly what that's going to do. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. Let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts on this change because I am really interested to hear what you think, whether it's good or bad, you like it or you don't. Please let me know, and be sure to subscribe for more videos about the new Tarkov patch and wipe that was dropped on us at the end of the year. I hope to see you in future ones.